Good night. It is 16 minutes past 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 8th of August 2023. I'm going to be sharing with you Butlers, the lives of the saints, and a very special priest for all priests and for us. His day of being honoured is today, and his name is St. John Vianney. There are other saints on the same page, and hopefully I'll be continuing after reading his life to theirs. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Holy Michael, Archangel, defend me in this day of battle. Be my safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, I humbly pray. And do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust down to hell Satan and all the wicked evil spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls. Amen. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love entrusts me here, ever this night be at my side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. Amen. St. John Vianney, A.D. 1859. The beauty of holiness will not be gainsaid, and from time to time some more than usually resplendent example forces the admiration of the whole world. Such were the little flower and the holy cure of ARS, who is known as St. John Vianney. And of these two, the popularity of M. Vianney is the more remarkable, because the halo of sentimentality with which undisciplined devotees or unscrupulous exploiters I'm trying to move the microphone. It's not going to be good if I have it too far away. So I'll just continue from that first line. Because the halo of sentimentality with which undisciplined devotees or unscrupulous exploiters can so easily surround Sœur Thérèse is far less easily fitted to his head. His face can so easily surround Sœur Thérèse. Is far less easily fitted to his head. His face alone is a difficulty, for little can be done by way of getting superficial appeal out of a man whose exterior appearance is that of a sanctified Voltaire, and the life of a country curé, priest, in France is no less, even if no more, unfamiliar to the average Englishman or American than the inside of a Carmelite convent. The world into which John Mary Vianney was born, at Dardilly near Lyons, on May the 8th, 1786, was not an undisturbed one. When he was 3, the revolution began, and 2 years later, Dardilly found itself saddled with a constitutional priest. So the little John and his parents had to assist in secret at the Mass of any fugitive loyal priest who came to the neighbourhood. While the terror was going on, no less at Lyons than at Paris and elsewhere, he was learning to be a herd boy, shepherding the cattle and sheep of Matthew Vianney's farm in the meadows on either side of the little river Planches. He was a quiet, well-behaved and religious child who urged his companions to be good and would always rather play at church than at games, though he still had skill at quoits, which they played for sous. He made his first Holy Communion in secret when he was 13, and very shortly after Mass could be offered again in public at Dardilly. 5 years later, he broached to his father his project of becoming a priest. But the good man was unwilling. He could not afford to educate his son, having already had to provide for other members of the family, and could not spare him from the work of the farm. And it was not till he was 20 that John Mary could get permission to leave home for the neighbouring village of Écully, where the Abbé Ballet had established a presbytery school. His studies were a source of great trouble to him. He had little natural aptitude, and his only schooling had been a brief period at the village school opened at Dardilly when he was 9. Latin, above all, he found such difficulty in mastering that for a time he and his teacher were discouraged. In the summer of 1806, he made a pilgrimage on foot over 60 miles, and begging his food and shelter on the way, to the shrine of St. John Francis Regis at La Louversque, to implore God's assistance in this unforeseen obstacle. On his return, he found his studies no easier, but the deadly disease of discouragement was gone, and in the following year he was further strengthened by the sacrament of confirmation. On this occasion, he took the name of Baptist, and this grace came at the right moment, for another and very serious trial was at hand. Through his name not having been entered on the roll of exempt ecclesiastical students, John Mary Vianney was conscripted for the army. In vain M. Bally tried to get the matter put right. In vain Matthew Vianney tried to get a substitute for his son. He had to report at the depot in Lyons on October 26, 1809. 2 days later he was taken ill and sent to hospital, and his draft for the army in Spain left without him. On January the 5th, being barely convalescent, he was ordered to report at Rouen for another draft on the morrow, and, having gone into a church to pray, arrived only after it had gone. However, he was given his movement order and set out to catch up the draft at Renaison, having still no military accoutrements but his knapsack. It carried the saint's halo rather than the marshal's baton. John made for poor progress, and while he was resting at the approach to the mountains of La Forez, a stranger suddenly appeared, picked up the knapsack, and peremptorily ordered him to follow. He was too tired to do aught but obey, and presently found himself in a hut near the remote mountain village of Les Noes. He now learned that the stranger was a deserter from the army, and that much more such were hiding in the woods and hills around. John did not know what to do. He saw at once that his situation was compromising, and after a few days reported himself to the mayor of the commune. M. Fayot was a humane official and a sensible man. He pointed out to John that he was already technically a deserter, and that of two evils the lesser was to remain in refuge where he was, and found him a lodging in the house of his own cousin. His hiding place was in a stable under a hayloft. For 14 months John Mary, known as Jerome Vincent, was at Les Noes, persevering with his Latin, teaching the children of his hosts, and working on their farms, and earning their love and respect. Several times he was nearly taken by gendarmes, once feeling the point of a sword between his ribs, as if it was thrust about in the hay of the loft. In March 1810, the Emperor, on the occasion of his marriage with the Archduchess Marie-Louise, had proclaimed an amnesty for all defaulters, and early in the following year, on his brother volunteering to join up before his time as a substitute, John Mary was able to return home a free man. In 1811, he received the tonsure, and at the end of the following year was sent for a year's philosophy to the Petit Séminaire at Verrières. His career there was anything but distinguished, but he plodded on humbly and doggedly, and in the autumn of 1813 went to the Grand Seminary at Lyons. Here all the instruction and studies were in Latin, and although the authorities recognized his quality and made special provision and allowances for him, John Mary made no headway at all. At the end of the first term, he left the seminary to be coached privately by M. Bally at Écully, and after 3 months presented himself for examination. In his viva, he lost his head and broke down. The examiners could not accept him for ordination, but recommended him to try another diocese. M. Bally went off at once to see the Abbé Bochard, one of the examiners, and he agreed to come with the rector of the seminary and interview Vianney privately. After this interview, which was satisfactory, they went to put the case of the most unlearned but most devout seminarian in Lyons before the vicar general, who was governing the diocese in the archbishop's absence. M. Courbon asked one question: "Is M. Vianney good?" "He's a model of goodness," was the reply. "Very well, then let him be ordained. The grace of God will do the rest." On July the 2nd, 1814, John Mary Vianney received the minor orders and subdiaconate and returned to Écully to continue his studies with M. Bally. In June 1815, he received the diaconate 5 days after the Battle of Waterloo, and on August the 12th, the priesthood, He offered his first Mass the following day and was appointed curate to Mbali, to whose clear-sightedness and perseverance is due, under God, the fact that St. John Mary Vianney ever attained to the priesthood. The Church wants not only learned priests, but even more holy ones. The Vicar General of Lyons had said at his ordination, and Monsignor Simon, Bishop of Grenoble, had seen in the Abbé Vianney a good priest. The things that a priest must know, he did know, but not necessarily from textbooks. Moral theology, for example. When M. Beauchard cross-examined him on difficult cases, his replies were explicit and accurate, for the Abbé Vianney was a saint, and he had common sense, and moral casuistry is sanctified common sense. A few months after his appointment to École, he received his faculties to hear confessions. His first penitent was his own rector, and very soon the run on his confessional was noticeable. Later on, the hearing of confessions was to take up 3/4 of his time. Quietly, rector and curate began to have a holy competition in austerity, rather after the manner of monks in the Thebaid. The cure denounced his vicare to the vicar general for exceeding all bounds, and while M. Vianney retorted by accusing the rector of excessive mortifications, M. Courbon laughed and said, "The people of École were lucky to have 2 such priests to do penance for them." In 1817, to the infinite sorrow of his pupil, Mbali died, and early in the following year, the Abbé Vianney was made parish priest at ARS, a remote and neglected place of 230 souls. In every sense of the word, a hole. Excuse me a moment. I have to have a sip of water with, I think it's got Ribena or something like that in it, not sure. Thank you. Excuse me a moment. There has been a good deal of exaggeration of the debased spiritual state of Ars at the time when M. Vianney took it in hand, just as there has been of the ignorance of the good man himself. It seems to have been in just about the same state as many English villages in the 3rd quarter of the 20th century. Little definite immorality and malicious wickedness, but little true religion and love of God. The greatest scandal at Ars was probably the deadly scandal of ordinary life. For the rest, there were several exemplary Christian families, including that of the mayor and the lady of the manor. Mademoiselle M.A.C. Garnier des Garrets, Milde Ars, was sincerely, if rather fussily, pious. The new cure, he was really at that time only a chaplain to a sort of chapel of ease, not only continued but redoubled his austerities, especially the use of a cruel discipline, and for the first 6 years of his incumbency lived on practically nothing but potatoes, seeking to make himself a sacrifice for the shortcomings of his feeble flock. The evil spirits of impurity and drunkenness and dishonesty and indifference are not cast out by prayer, but fasting and fasting. And if the people of ARS would not pray and fast for themselves, well then, their pastor must do so for them. When he had personally visited every household under his care and provided a regular catechism class for the children, he set to work in earnest to make a real conversion of ARS by personal intercourse in the confessional and by laboriously and carefully prepared sermons which he delivered naturally, but not quietly. The people were too sunk in religious indifference and material preoccupations to be amenable to quietness and moderation. Moreover, in those days, Jansenism was still something more than a memory and had left its backwash in the methods and teaching of orthodox but rigorous directors and theologians. Consequently, it is not surprising to find that the curé of ARS was very strict indeed. There were too many taverns in the village, where money was wasted, drunkenness encouraged, evil talk not reprehended. First, the two near the church were shut for lack of enough business. Then two more. 7 new ones were opened in succession, but each one had to close. He was praying a lot then. He waged relentless war against blasphemy, profanity, and obscenity, and was not afraid to utter from the pulpit the words and expressions that offended God. So there should be no mistake as to what he was talking about. For 8 years and more, he struggled for a proper observance of Sunday, not merely to get everybody to Mass and Vespers, but to abolish work, which at times was done on Sunday without a shadow of necessity. Above all, he set his face against dancing, maintaining that it was of necessity an occasion of sin to those who took part, and even to those who only looked on. To those who took part in it, whether publicly or privately, he was merciless. They must give it up entirely and keep to their resolution, or absolution was refused them. M. Le Cure waged this battle and the associated engagement of modesty in clothes for 25 years, but he won in the end. In 1821, the district of ARS was made a succursal parish, and in 1823 it became part of the revived diocese of Belley. This was an occasion for slanderous attacks on M. Vianney, whose reforming zeal naturally made enemies for him, and his new bishop, Monsignor Devy, sent the dean to inquire what it was all about. But the bishop soon learned to have confidence in the curé of ARS, and later offered him an important parish elsewhere, which he refused only after a good deal of hesitation. In the meanwhile, the reputation of His Holiness and achievements was also becoming known, and he was asked to give several parochial missions. When his confessional was always besieged, in 1824 there was opened at ARS by the enterprise of the curate a free school for girls run by Catherine Lassagne and Benedicta Lardet, two young women of the village whom he had sent away to a convent to be trained. From this school sprang, some 3 years later, the famous institution of La Providence, a shelter for orphans and other homeless or deserted children. Neither babies on the one hand nor adolescent girls on the other being turned away. Not a halfpenny was accepted from the inmates, even from the girls who could pay, and neither Mademoiselle Lassagne, Mademoiselle Lardet, nor any other helper received any salary. It was a charity run on alms, and its final end the saving of souls. At times there were 60 people thus being provided for, and the curate was hard put to it to support each family. I'm going to have to put the book down a bit because it's very tiring. I hope you can still hear me. So hold on a moment. I must get a little bit more comfortable. Sorry. Yes. That's 27 minutes and I'm already in pain. Never mind, I'll offer it up for the souls in purgatory. Oh, let me find my place. Okay. Not a halfpenny was accepted from the inmates, even from the girls who could pay, and neither Mademoiselle Lassagne, Mademoiselle Lardet, nor any other helper received any salary. It was a charity run on alms, and its final end the saving of souls. At times there were 60 people thus being provided for, and the curé was hard put to it to support such a family. On one occasion the loft was found full of wheat, under circumstances that clearly indicate a miracle, and on another occasion the cook testified to making 10 20-pound loaves from a few pounds of flour. At the prayer of Vianney, such works as these slowly and surely brought about a change of heart among his parishioners, and visitors noticed and commented on their orderly appearance and good behaviour. And it was the personal influence and example of the man himself that moved them in the first place. Our curé is a saint, and we must obey him. We are no better than other people, but we live close to a saint. Some of them doubtless never got beyond that to, it is the will of God, we must obey him. But still they persevered in obeying the curé precisely because he was a good man. But still while his people were slowly and painfully coming back to a Christian life, was being the object of manifestations which would appear to be nothing less than a persecution by the devil himself, as Vianney believed them to be. Over the arch of the chapel of St. John the Baptist in the parish church, he had painted the words Sateto fut le prix de una danse. There is in history no other record of seemingly diabolical infestation so long, so varied, and so cogent. The phenomena ranged from noises and voices to personal violence, and the unexplained burning of the saint's bed, and continued intermittently from 1824 for over 30 years, both by day and night, sometimes under conditions in which they were observed by others beside the sufferer. In fact, that happened with Padre Pio, and he had lots of witnesses at the monastery. Okay. Both by day and night, sometimes under conditions in which they were observed by others beside the sufferer. It is not an exaggeration to say he took it all as all part of the day's work. "You must get very frightened," the Abbé Tocanier said to him. "One gets used to everything, my friend," was the reply. "The Grappin and I are almost mates." Not only was the curé of Ars subjected to supernatural persecution, but he also suffered from attacks which were, it not for the infected state of human nature, would be labelled unnatural. Some of the less worthy and less discerning among his brother priests, remembering only his lack of education and formal training, listening perhaps to idle gossip, certainly unable to recognize sanctity when they saw it, criticized his ill-judged zeal, his ambition, his presumption. He was even a quack and an impostor. "Poor little curé of Ars," he commented. "What don't they make him do and say? They're preaching on him now, and no longer on the gospel." But they did not stop at verbal criticism and sacristy tittle-tattle. They delated him to the Bishop of Belley. The curé refused to take any action, nor after enquiry did Monsignor Devi, but having heard a priest apply the adjective mad to M. Vianney, he referred it before his clergy assembled at their annual retreat and added, "Gentlemen, I wish that all my clergy had a small grain of the same madness." Another, hold on a minute, sorry, I'm just feeling a bit uncomfortable. Another of the astonishing circumstances of the Abbé Vianney's incumbency of Ars was his becoming a place of pilgrimage, even during his lifetime, and that not to the shrine of his dear little Philomena, which he had set up, but to himself. No doubt curiosity had its share in starting it, for miracles of loaves and visits of the devil cannot be kept quiet. But it gathered strength and volume and continued because people wanted the spiritual direction of the village priest in his confessional. This steady stream of penitence, the pilgrimage, was what chiefly upset his myopic clerical critics. Some of them, even forbade their people to go to him. People from afar began to consult him so early as 1827. From 1830 to 1845, the daily visitors averaged over 300. At Lyons, a special booking office was opened for ARS, and 8-day return tickets issued. One could hardly hope to get a word with the cure in less. From him this meant not less than 11 or 12 hours every day in the church at 11 o'clock. Simple discourses unprepared. He had no chance to prepare them, which went to the hearts of the most learned and the most hardened, rich and poor, learned and simple, good and bad, lay and cleric, bishops, priests, religious, all came to ours to kneel in the confessional and sit before the catechism stall. Mr. Vianney, Monsieur Vianney, did not give long instructions and directions to his penitents, a few words, a sentence even, but it had the authority of holiness, and not infrequently was accompanied by supernatural knowledge of the penitent's life. Another Padre Pio thing. How many times, for example, he was able to correct the number of years since a penitent had last been to confession, or remind him of a sin which he had forgotten. Love your clergy very much was all he said to me, said the Archbishop of Auch. Love the good God very much to the Superior General of a teaching institute. What a pity, what a pity! He would murmur at each accusation and weep at the table of sin. This people came hundreds of miles and waited sometimes 12 hours on end, or had to attend in the church day after day before they could be heard. And by these simple means, numberless conversions were made. At first, the rigour with which the cure treated his own flock was extended to outsiders, but with advancing years came greater experience of the needs and capabilities of souls, and deeper insight into moral theology and pity. Kindness and tenderness modified his severity. He discouraged people from encumbering themselves with a multiplicity of little devotions. The Rosary, the Angelus, ejaculatory prayer, above all, the Church's liturgy, these he recommended. Private prayer, he would say, is like straw scattered here and there. If you set it on fire, it makes a lot of little flames. But gather these straws into a bundle and light them, and you get a mighty fire, rising like a column into the sky. Public prayer is like that. There were no affected attitudes, no O's and R's, no sighs and transports about M. Vianney. When most interiorly moved, he simply smiled or wept. Reference has been made to his power of reading souls, and his knowledge of the hidden past and of future events was no less remarkable than his more formal miracles. None of these things can be brought within the charge of uselessness, a criticism so easily and so thoughtlessly made at the marvels attributed to some of the saints. But the Abbé Vianney's prophecies did not relate to public affairs, but to the lives of individuals, and were directed to their personal help and consolation. On one occasion, he made the interesting admission that hidden things seemed to come to him by way of memory. He told the Abbé Tocania that, "I once said to a certain woman, 'So it is you who have left your husband in hospital,' and who refused to join him." "How do you know that?" she asked. "I have not mentioned it to a soul." I was more surprised than she was. I imagined that she had already told me the whole story. The Baroness de la Combe, a widow, was troubled by the determination of her 18-year-old son to marry a girl of 15. She determined to consult the cure of ARS, whom she had never met. When she went into the church, it was crowded at the doors, and she despaired of ever getting a word with him. Suddenly he came out of his confessional, went straight up to her and whispered, "Let them marry. They will be very happy." The servant girl was warned by him that a great peril awaited her in Lyons. A few days later, the memory of this warning enabled her to escape from the hands of a murderer of girls, at whose trial she subsequently gave evidence. To Monsignor Ullathorne, Bishop of Birmingham, he in 1854 said with great conviction, "I believe that the Church in England will recover her former greatness." He stopped a strange girl in his church one day. "Is it you who have written me, my child?" "Yes, l'Abbé." "Very well, you must not worry. You will enter the convent all right. You will hear from the Reverend Mother in a few days." And it was so. Nor had he communicated with the abbess concerned. Mademoiselle Henry, a shopkeeper at Chalon-sur-Saône, came to ask Vianney to pray for the cure of her sick aunt. He told her to go back home at once, for while you are here you are being imposed on. She returned accordingly and found her assistant making free with the stock, and the aunt recovered. The numerous miracles of bodily healing reported of the cure of Ars were mostly attributed to him to the intercession of Saint Philomena, and his first demand of those that sought them was fervour of faith, something of the faith by which he himself was enabled miraculously to provide money and goods when one or other of his charities was in straits. But the schoolmaster of Ars, echoing the well-known words about Saint Bernard, saw where was the great miracle of all. The most difficult, extraordinary, and amazing work that the cure did was his own life. And every day, after the noon Angelus, when he left the church to go to the presbytery to eat the food brought in from La Providence, there was a manifestation of recognition, love, and respect for his goodness. It sometimes took him over 20 minutes to cross that dozen yards. The sick in soul and body knelt to ask his blessing and his prayers. They seized his hands, they tore pieces from his cassock. It was one of his hardest mortifications. "What misguided devotion!" he exclaimed at it. It is not surprising that as time went on, Vianney longed more and more for solitude and quiet. But there is more to it than that. Every one of his 41 years at ARS was spent there against his own will. All the time he had to fight his personal predilection for the life of a Carthusian or Cistercian. He left the village 3 times, ran away, in fact, and in 1843, after a grave illness, it needed the diplomacy of the bishop and of M. des Garrettes to get him to return. In 1852, Monsignor Chalandon, Bishop of Belley, made M. Vianney an honorary canon of the chapter. He was invested almost by force and never again put on his mozetta, which indeed he sold for 50 francs, which he required for some charitable purpose. 3 years later, well-meaning but insensitive officials obtained for him further recognition in the form of civil decoration. He was made a Knight of the Imperial Order of the Legion of Honor. But with this, he positively refused to be invested, and no persuasion could induce him to have the Imperial Cross pinned to his cassock, even for a moment. What if, when death comes, I were to appear with these toys and God were to say to me, "Begone, you've had your reward"? I can't think why the Emperor has sent it to me, he added, unless it is because I was once a deserter. In 1853, M. Vianney made his last attempt at flight from ARS. It is a moving story of the old and worn-out priest cajoled back to his presbytery on behalf of the numerous poor sinners who were unable to do without him. He imagined he was doing the will of God by going away, said Catherine Lassagne in innocent surprise, and it may well have been the will of God that his servant should now have some few years of repose and peace to practice the contemplation which had already borne fruits in some of the highest experiences of ecstasy and vision. It is not impossible that Bishop Chalandon should have been mistaken in not allowing him to resign his cure, but such a possibility was not one which M. Vianney would entertain. He devoted himself to his ministry more assiduously than ever. In the year 1859, over 100,000 pilgrims visited ARS. The cure was now a very old man of 73. Oh, that makes me very old then, because I'm 3 years older than he was. Oh dear. So I'm very ancient too then, and the strain was too much. Yes, sometimes you can feel it. On July the 18th, he knew the end was at hand, and on the 29th, he lay down on his bed for the last time. "It is my poor end. You must send for M. le Cure of Jassans," he said. Even now, he sent for several souls to kneel by his bed and finish their confessions. As the news spread, people flocked into Ars from all sides. 20 priests accompanied the Abbé Beau when he brought the last sacraments from the church. It is sad to receive Holy Communion for the last time, murmured the dying priest. On August the 3rd, the Bishop of Belley arrived in haste, and at 2 o'clock in the morning of the 4th, amid a storm of thunder and lightning, the earthly life of the Curé of Ars came to a gentle end. St. John Mary Baptist Vianney was canonized by Pius XI in 1925. The same Pope made him principal patron saint of the parochial clergy throughout the world in 1929. I cannot read the small font. It's too small for my eyes, but I'm now going to, that's the end of John Vianney life, but now I'm going to read Saints CYRIACUS, LARGUS and SMARAGDUS, martyrs. The date is unknown and it's also very, very short. The legend of Saint CYRIACUS and his companions is a romance devoid of historical value. It relates that CYRIACUS, who was a deacon, who with Sicinius, Largus and SMARAGDUS succoured the Christians who were being forced to work on the construction of the baths of Diocletian. Having been arrested, CYRIACUS cured the emperor's daughter, Artemia, of demonic possession, and was rewarded with the present of a house. Herein he established a place of worship, the titulus Cyriaci. He was then sent to Persia at the request of its king, whose daughter suffered in the same way as Artemia, and her also he cured. After his return to Rome, he was apprehended by order of Maximian, together with Largus and SMARAGDUS, and on March the 16th, that was my brother Alan Walmsley's birthday, 1945, rest in peace, dear brother, in company with a source of others, he was tortured and beheaded at a spot on the Salarian Way. On August the 8th, Pope St. Marcellus, I had a sister Marcellus teach me in King's Lynn Servite Convent, I moved the bodies to a burial place which received the name of Cyriacus on the road to Ostia. That Cyriacus was an authentic martyr, honoured on this day in Rome from an early date, is proved from the Depositio Martyrum of 354, because the date is unknown, it says here. Therein he is said to rest close beside the 7th milestone on the road to Ostia in company with Largus, Ix Maracudus, and 3 others who are named. Delahaye shows that this Cyriacus has been confused with another Cyriacus, the founder of the titulus Cyriaci, and that a fictitious story was later evoked, which is best known to us as an episode in the spurious Acts of Pope St. Marcellinus. Well, I can't read more on that section, but the new one coming up has a title, and the title is this. Hold on a moment. I've got to get this straightened out because it's feeling a bit uncomfortable again. Sorry, but this is 55 minutes now, but I need to get to the end of it. The 14 Holy Helpers. I think I need them here. This name represents a group of saints, devotion to whom as a body was German in origin and largely German in diffusion. The idea behind the devotion is sufficiently indicated by its name, and the theoretical qualification for inclusion in the group was a real or alleged divine promise to the saint during life that he or she would have particular intercessory powers to help men in need. The unusual 14 names are Achatius, June 22nd. Barbara, I have a friend called Barbara. She's from Jamaica. December the 4th. Invoked against lightning, fire, explosion, sudden and unprepared death. Blaze, February the 3rd. You have your throats blessed and a candle blessed. Invoked against throat troubles. Catherine, November the 25th. Invoked by philosophers, students, wheelers and others. Christopher, July the 25th. Invoked by travellers in difficulties. CYRIACUS, August the 8th. Dennis, October the 9th. Invoked against headaches and rabies. Hang on. Headache and rabies. Erasmus, June the 2nd. Against colic, cramp, etc. And finally, Eustace, September. I have to turn the page. Invoked by hunters. George, April the 23rd, his patron saint of England, protector of soldiers. Giles, September the 1st. I have a niece born on that day. Yeah. And then invoked against epilepsy, insanity and sterility. Margaret, July 20th, invoked against possession and by pregnant women. Pantaleon, July 27th, invoked against Pythias. And Vitus, June 15th, invoked against epilepsy and his dance. It will be noticed that all these saints except one, Giles, were martyrs. Among the other saints included in the group locally were Dorothy, February the 6th, Leonard of Noblac, November the 6th, Magnus of Fusen and Magnus of Altino, October 6th, Oswald, August 5th, and Neswell and Nicholas of Myra, Santa Claus, December 6th. All the other above will be found referred to herein under their dates. In France, the helpers are 15, the extra one being Our Lady. This devotion is an example of the medieval popular tendency to honour the saints more for what they do for their devotees than for what they had been in their early lives. The cultus became widely diffused during the 15th century. It spread. My eyes are getting tired. Wait a minute. It spread from the Germanies to Bohemia, Moravia, Hungary, Italy and France. It does not seem to have reached England, churches, hospitals and various places on 8th of August and other dates. It is still observed at a few places in Germany, and there is a church under its therein indication at Baltimore in Maryland. So I think we're reaching near to the end, but not quite. So I'm going to try to continue, even though my eyes are very, very tired. I think it's because it's such a small font. I do believe that makes you tired. So the name of this saint in the same day, August the 8th, is Saint HORMESDAS, martyr, AD 420. So let's hope this has a little bit of interest so that I don't fall asleep. The shocking persecution of Christians carried on by Sapor II, king of Persia, I did marry a Persian, rest in peace, was renewed by Yazdagerd I, the occasion being the burning down of a Mazdian temple by a priest. This unhappy man, who brought so much distress on the faithful, was constrained to admit that persuasion and not violence is the only Christian method. But this did not mollify the anger of the king. It is not easy, says Theodoret, to describe or express the cruelties which were then invented against the disciples of Christ. I think not much has changed. On the death of Yazdagerd, the persecution was carried on by his son, Bahram, and Hormizd was the one of the chief victims. He was of the nobility among the Hormizd was one of the chief victims. He was of the nobility among the Persians, son to the governor of a prince. Bahram sent for him and commanded him to renounce Jesus Christ. Hormizdas answered him, "Nay, this would offend God and be against charity and justice. Whoever dares to violate the supreme law of the sovereign Lord of all would easily betray his king, who is only a mortal man. If that be a crime deserving death, what must it be to renounce the God and ruler of the universe?" The king at this answer caused him to be deprived of his rank, honours and goods, and even stripped of clothes to his loincloth, and ordered him to look after the camels of the army. Some time after, Bahram saw Hormizdas, all sunburnt and covered with dust, and calling to mind his former position and the high office of his father, he was filled with pity. So he sent for him, ordered a gown to be given to him, and said, "Now lay aside your obstinacy and renounce the carpenter's son." The saint pulled off the gown and threw it away, saying, "Why should you have thought that about so easily be tempted to abandon the law of God? Take back your present." The king, incensed at his boldness, and sent him back to his camels. It is not known when and how Saint Hormizdas suffered martyrdom. So the final one on this page, I don't know if there's any over the page. I'll have a quick look, and he's got the name of a modern priest who's on the internet, a cancelled priest. Saint ALTMAN, Bishop of PASSAU, AD 1091. So, oh gosh, we're not at the end yet. Oh goodness me, we have got Saint ALTMAN, Blessed Joan of Asa, Matron, and the final one is Blessed John Felton Martyr. They cover 2 pages, so I just asked my angel to keep me awake. Saint ALTMAN, Saint Altman, also Father James Altman's got a saint with his name, surname. Let me struggle here. I am struggling a lot. I'm finding this difficult because I'm very tired now. I don't always feel tired, but I do feel tired when I'm reading a small font. It's exhausting, to be honest. So here, I'll try and focus a little bit more. Saint Altman, Bishop of PASSAU. Saint Altman was born at Paderborn during the first quarter of the 11th century and studied at Paris. After being ordained, he was appointed canon and master of the cathedral school at Paderborn, then provost of the chapter of Aachen and chaplain to the Emperor Henry III, and confessor and counsellor of the Dowager Empress Agnes. In 1064, he took part in a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, which numbered 7,000 persons, according to a monk who was there, and was led by several archbishops and bishops, and the adventure was a most unhappy one. Having safely traversed Europe and Asia Minor, with no more than the misfortunes inevitable to so long a journey on horseback, they were attacked by Saracens in Palestine and sustained a siege in an abandoned village. Lack of food forced them to surrender, and they might all have been massacred, but for the intervention of a friendly emir. Though they eventually reached Jerusalem, they were not able to visit many of the other holy places because of the enmity of the Saracens, and by the time the pilgrimage reached home again, it had lost nearly half of its members, dead from hardship, sickness, and murder. It was happenings of this sort which contributed 30 years later to the institution of the Crusades. Immediately on his return, Altman was nominated to the See of PASSAU, and he set himself energetically to govern a large and deteriorated diocese. For the increase of learning, the care of the poor, and proper carrying out of divine worship, he looked particularly to regular clergy. At Gottenwijk he founded an abbey of Augustinian canons, put the same as Sankt Pölten in the place of a secular canons, and introduced the Cluniac reform at Kremünster. In these works he had the help of the Empresses Agnes and Bertha, and the Emperor Henry IV was a benefactor of the see. But St. Altman soon found himself in conflict with that monarch when in 1074 Pope St. Gregory VII renewed the pontifical decrees against simony and married clergy. Altman read out the letter in his cathedral. It was very ill received. He had to escape from the ensuing uproar and found himself opposed in the matter of celibacy by a strong party led by his own provost. The bishop's chief supporters were the Augustinian canons, but the rebels invoked the help of the emperor. ALTMAN did his best to enforce the decree, excommunicated the provost, and when in the following year the Pope forbade lay investiture, definitely ranged himself against Henry. He was driven from his see and went to Rome. He had some scruples as to whether he held his own simoniacally as he had received it by favour of Empress Agnes, but St. Gregory the Seventh confirmed him in it and appointed him delegate apostolic for Germany. St. ALTMAN returned to his see in 1081, but he was turned out again almost at once. He spent the remaining years of his life in exile, but maintained a footing in the eastern part of his diocese, from whence he exercised a great influence. He had lost all his revenues and was in great poverty, but for all that his charity to the poor did not abate, and in a time of famine he sold his furniture to relieve the suffering. Nor did the disturbance of his rule and his long banishment entirely spoil his work. A canon of Gottwake, who wrote an account of him not long after his death, says that when he was appointed bishop, many of his churches were of wood, and so were his priests. He had stone churches built, and though it was more difficult to reform his priests, he had stone churches built, and though it was more difficult to reform the clergy than their buildings, he had inspired many priests with an enthusiasm for celibacy and a contempt for riches. St. ALTMAN was an important figure in the early history of canons regular, in addition to the foundation mentioned above. He instituted them at St. Florian, St. Nicholas's in his cathedral city, and other places. He died in 1091, and his cultus was approved by Leo the 13th. So I still have to continue to read two more, and it's getting harder by the moment. Blessed Joan of Azza, matron, C.A.D. 1190. Oh gosh, yes, this was mentioned yesterday. I have to read this. This is the mother of St. Dominic. She had a powerful influence on his life, so we're going to find out about St. Dominic's mother now. Maybe that'll keep me awake. The mother of St. Dominic is said to have been born in the castle of Eza, near Aranda, in Old Castile. Nothing is known of her childhood, but doubtless her marriage took place when she was very young, according to the custom of the time and country. Her husband was Felix, perhaps de Guzman, who was warden of the small town of Calaruga in the province of Burgos, of which Dante writes in speaking of Saint Dominic. Happy Calaruga, there where the gentle breeze whispers and wanders among the young flowers that bloom over the garden of Europe, near that shore where the waves break and behind which the great sun sinks at evening. Here they lived, and here were born to them 4 children: Anthony, the poor and sick in a hospital; Blessed Manners, who followed his younger friars, younger brother Dominic, and an unknown daughter, whose 2 sons became preaching friars. The greatest of these children was a child of promise, for when Anthony and Mans were already grown up and clerics, Joan wished for another son and prayed to that end in the abbey church of Silos, and a vision of Saint Dominic of Silos is said to have appeared to her in sleep, telling her that a son would be born to her, and that he would be a shining light to the church, and she in thankfulness determined that he should be baptized Dominic. While the child was yet unborn, Blessed Joan dreamed that she bore a dog in her womb, and that it broke away from her with a burning torch in its mouth, wherewith it set the world aflame. This dog became a symbol of the Dominican order, and in later ages gave a rise to the pun Domini Canis, the watchdog of the land, the watchdog of the Lord. My eyes are getting terrible. His godmother at his baptism, or, as some say, Blessed Joan again, likewise had a dream, of which the babe appeared with a shining star upon his forehead, enlightening the world. Wherefore is a star often shown upon images of the saint. Dominic remained under the care of his mother till he was 7 years old, then was sent to school with his uncle, the parish priest of Gumiel-des-Eaux. Other stories are told by the later writers about the saint's infancy. It has not been given to many mothers of saints to be themselves beautiful, beatified, and Joan achieved this distinction by her own virtues and not by those of her children. It is not unusual for hagiographers to praise the parents of their heroes, but to the mother of Dominic such praise is due in her own right. To beauty of soul she added beauty of body, and both were handed on to the greatest of her sons. Her cultus dates from the moment her death. A hermitage at Uclueles, where she would go to visit the commandery of the Knights of St. James, was called after her, and likewise a chapel in the cemetery of Calaruga. At the request of King Ferdinand II, this cultus was confirmed its child. Amen. I have one more, which is part of this August the 8th. It's really beginning to... Goodness me. It's the final one. I must hope to complete it. For Blessed John, Felton Martyr, AD 1570. On February the 25th, 1569 to 70, Pope St. Pius V published a bull, Regnans in Excelsis. On February the 25th, 1569, I read that, directed against Queen Elizabeth, who was at the time ostensibly a Catholic. By it she was declared excommunicate, deprived of the kingdom which she ruled, and all her subjects discharged from their allegiance, because she claimed headship, and all her subjects discharged from their allegiance, because she claimed headship of the Church in England. That's why I have to read this. Sheltered heretics, oppressed Catholics, and coerced her subjects into heresy and repudiation of the Holy See. contrary to her coronation oath. She took an oath. On the following May 25th, the citizen of London woke up to find a copy of this bull of excommunication of their sovereign fastened to the door of the Bishop of London's house, adjoining St. Paul's Cathedral. It had been put there late on the previous night by John Felton, who this is, a gentleman of a Norfolk family. I'm living in Norfolk and born in Norfolk, but I haven't always lived here, not the whole of my life, the beginning and the end. A gentleman of a Norfolk family who lived in Southwark. Well, Southwark is London, but he obviously lived there because of his work. It was not long before it was discovered who had done the deed. Searchers in the chambers of a well-known Catholic lawyer in Lincoln's Inn found a copy of the bull, arrested the lawyer and racked him. That means put him on the rack and... Oh, how painful. So, whereupon he confessed that he had had it from Felton. He was at once seized at Bermondsey, which is not far away from there, near the Old Kent Road. But although he at once admitted what he had done, he was not brought to trial for 3 months. He was kept in prison, Newgate and the Tower, and was 3 times racked. That's where they stretched the body. Oh. In the hope that he would confess to some political intrigue with the Spaniards. But there had been none on his part. He had published the bull as a legitimate pontifical censor for the Queen's religious offences. When brought to trial at the Guildhall on August the 4th, he pleaded guilty and openly declared the supremacy of the Holy See. On August the 4th, he pleaded guilty and openly declared the supremacy of the Holy See. 4 days later, he was dragged to St. Paul's churchyard. The scaffold was set up opposite the door on which the bull had been posted. And at the sight of the barbarous paraphernalia of execution, the martyr was seized with a violent spasm of fear. By an effort of will more violent, he overcame it. He pointed at the bishop's door, saying, "The Supreme Pontiff's letter against the pretended Queen were by me exhibited there. Now I am ready to die for the Catholic faith." To that Queen, as a token of goodwill, he sent a valuable ring off his finger. Then he knelt and said the Miserere, commended his soul to God, and was cast off. The executioner would in pity have let him hang, but the sheriff ordered that he be cut down alive, and as his heart was torn out, Mrs. Salisbury, his daughter, heard him utter the name of Jesus twice. The wife of Blessed John Felton had been a personal friend of the Queen, who after her husband's death licensed her to have a priest as chaplain in her house. How odd is that Queen? There are a few enough acts of this sort to Elizabeth's credit to make this one worth recording, and the circumstances doubtless had its effect in determining the career of the son, Blessed Thomas Felton, then a babe of 2, who 18 years later followed his father to martyrdom. So he kept his Catholic faith. John was equivalently beatified in the decree of 1886. There is no need here to discuss the question of the bull Regnans in Excelsis. Blessed John suffered for publishing a canonical act of the Holy See against a supporter of heresy and a persecutor who proceeded against him for supporting papal ecclesiastical jurisdiction, Whether the act was opportune or justifiable under the circumstances is beside the point. Popes, even when they are saints, as Pius V was, are not immune from errors of judgment, and it is now the general opinion of Catholics that regnans in excelsis was a belated attempt to exercise a deposing power already, in fact, a dead letter. For the rest, we have the words of another Pope Pius to the Academy of the Catholic Religion in 1871. Though certain popes have sometimes exercised this deposing power in extreme cases, they did so in accordance with the public law of the time, and by the agreement of Christian nations, whose reverence for the Pope as the supreme judge for Christ extended to his passing even civil judgment on princes and nations. But the present state of affairs is entirely different. No one now thinks any more of the right of deposing princes, which the Holy See formerly exercised, and the Supreme Pontiff even less than anyone. That is the end of the Lives of the Saints for August the 8th. I did find it challenging. I'm sorry if it doesn't sound as it should, but tiredness did overcome me rather a bit, and I'm looking for my bookmarker. So thank you if you have got this far without being overcome. It was quite a lot, and it's lasted 1 hour 26, so my apologies for that, but I can't divide up. I just have to try and keep going through, but I don't know if it makes any difference what time of day it is, but it isn't that late. It's not that late at all. I'm quite all right in the evenings. I have probably more or less tiredness in the evenings than the mornings. So good night and God bless. Thank you for listening. I'm sending you God's peace in abundance, and may you always be happy and joyful in the Lord. And I don't need to pray because I haven't read any sacred scripture, just the lives of these wonderful, interesting saints. And I must say, Father John Vianney is very, very special, but I'm surprised with the last one. I haven't remembered my history that well, but thank you and God bless. Good night. Bye.